They say how natural selection causes evolution. So this should be it. We should find evolution here, right? That's what the textbook says. Well, one thing I have to say, creationists really have no problem with natural selection. See, we actually thought of it before they did. It's okay. We thought of it, but it's a conservative process. That means it's quality control. That removes defective organisms and keeps the species strong. So I like to give the example of a bicycle shop. We make bicycles. So I'm going to put a quality control person, or natural selection guy, out at the door. So after we make a bike, I give it to the quality control guy, and he looks it over. If there's a problem, he sends it back. How long do we have to do that before we start making motorcycles? Right? It's got to evolve. How you could do that till you're blue in the face. Natural selection is never going to get you improvements. It only stops defects. Actually, here's from parasitology. From an evolutionist standpoint, this is their quote: natural selection can only act on those biologic properties that already exist. It cannot create properties in order to meet adaptational needs. So no new properties can come from natural selection. So if no new properties can come, there's no evolution here. Now, they use the survival of the fittest in terms of natural selection. Survival of the fittest does not explain arrival of the fittest. Right? Where'd he come from? Actually, it's kind of a tautology, and that means that it defines fittest as the one that survives. It's a little bit like saying survival of the survivist. It's using the first word to define the second word. So it really, how do you know he's the fittest? It's because he survived. He survived because he's the fittest. You can get nowhere quick. And actually, usually it's survival of the luckiest. There's no evolution here. So we'll forget natural selection. Let's go on to the next one. Ontology recapitulates phylogeny. How many of you, when you were in school, heard this phrase? I thought more people had heard that. When I was growing up, they always taught that. They made us say those words. And basically what this means is that developmental stages are relived. It relives what your ancestry is. So, if you were a fish and then you were a reptile, when you're in the egg, while you're developing, you'll relive the look of a fish and the look of a reptile. Because that's your ancestry. And this comes from a guy named Ernst Haeckel. And I'd like to take a few minutes to heckle Haeckel. He said the turning point of his thinking was when he read Charles Darwin's book. So he's a Darwinian follower. And he came up with these drawings. Now, if you study this drawing group pretty closely, you can see that there are some badly drawn things, like the baby human here looks a little more like a pig, the bottom right-hand image. Also up at the top, there's some other problems. Anyway, he was going to the University of Jena, or he was a professor there, when he made these drawings in 1874. That's a long time ago. And here's a statement by somebody from St. George's Hospital Medical School in London. He said, "A set of 19th century drawings that still appear in reference books are badly misdrawn," says an embryologist in Britain. Badly misdrawn, okay? Although Haeckel is being heckled, confessed to drawing from memory, he was still convicted of fraud. Well, thank goodness University of Jena had something about it to be good. The drawings still persist. That's the real mystery. So why are these drawings in a college textbook used at the University of West Florida in 1999? 120 years after they've been shown to be frauds. Isn't that funny? Exactly. What would they put in the book? There you go. And this idea has gone, and it's been in numerous books in various ways. For instance, this drawing on your left shows what they're calling bronchial arches. Bronchial arches, that's something to do with breathing. And they also call them bronchial slits or gill slits, like a fish. But do you see the colors, 1, 2, 3, 4? If you look on the drawing on the right, that's where the colors end up as the human develops. They have nothing to do with breathing. If they were the lungs or something, then you could say, oh, well, see, it's still related to breathing. But these features in the human body have nothing to do with breathing. These slits are not gill slits. That's just evolutionary fog. It has nothing to do with reality. And here's another one. Gill slits in a human. And they talk about it, it's got a tail from, prior evolutionary stage, and this is proof of evolution. The only problem is it's a lie. Here's another one, another Holt biology. Gill's pouch. It's not true. Even the chicken, it's not true. Well, they have lies, but there's no evolution here. This is not a method for evolution. It's just kind of a proof of evolution, and it's a lie. So there's no evolution, and ontology recapitulates phylogeny. There's no evolution there. All right, we're getting through them. Here's the third one, genetic memory. Now, this idea was that your life experiences would affect the genetics that go to your children. So let's say, for instance, Daddy works really hard in the field with his feet, and they get calloused every day, and he's working his feet really hard, that his genetics would change such that his child would have better feet. Actually, geneticists know better. There's no mechanism for that passage of information. But here's the experiment they did to help disprove this. They took mice, they measured the length of their tail, and they let them breed for many generations, and every time after they were born, they would cut their tail off. The next generation would come along, they'd cut their tail off. And after many generations, they measured the length of the tail, and it was the same. Nothing changed. Well, there aren't too many. I would say there's probably very close to zero evolutionists that actually believe in genetic memory. So this pillar is no evolution here. That mechanism, no one believes anymore. Now let's look at another pillar, spontaneous creation. Now, if Darwin had read his Bible all the way to chapter 2, verse 2, he would have learned, and on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made. You see, the idea comes from the idea when they would toss garbage out in the city dump, that it would spontaneously become rats. And meat tossed out in the garbage would spontaneously produce maggots. Out of nowhere, right? Creation's still going on. Well, they did an experiment with a jar. They got 3 jars. One jar they had open, and they put some meat in it. They had another jar, they put a cork on it, In a third jar, they put a cloth on it and a rubber band. And then they let it sit. Well, the jar that was open bred maggots. The jar with the cloth on top had maggots on the cloth. I guess they could smell the meat. And the jar with the cork had no maggots. So all they had to do is understand the life cycle of the fly, and they would have realized there's no spontaneous creation, it's just the flies are breeding. Same thing with rats. They like garbage because there's stuff to eat, whatever. There's no evolution here. There's no spontaneous creation. Nobody actually believes this anymore. Darwin believed it, but no one now believes it. All right. The last one, mutation. If we don't have evolution here, we don't have evolution. This is it. It all rides on mutations. Well, mutations are genetic in nature. You know, breeders, they understand that there's a genetic change between different breeding stock, and they've done dogs. They've been able to breed to various different ways. And I was very insulted that there's no Chihuahua on this chart. Anyway, if you take and breed an animal to pick the largest one out of every litter or pick the smallest one out of every litter, what you actually do is you reduce the variation that animal can have. Once you made the very, very large dogs, you can't breed it back down to a Chihuahua. It's done. And as a matter of fact, breeders know this very well. You know, you get things that are bred high-strung and bred highly bred. They're problem animals. I didn't like that Chihuahua. I kind of like Chica better. You see, they're swimming at the shallow end of the gene pool. Genetic information is lost in the breeding. Well, let's get to mutations. That's more to the point. Mutations, well, before I get to mutations, I want to look a little bit at genetics. From the word Christmas, you can get has, mat, Sam, Christ, Ram, Sat, Hit, etc. You see, I'm using the letters from the word Christmas. But you cannot get Xerox, zebra, or a holy day. Here is a 5-legged bull. This is a mutation. The leg there is growing out of his shoulder. Now notice it's not a fin or a wing. It's genetic information it already has. It's another leg. Now, he doesn't run any faster. Here's another mutant. We have a mutant Ancorn sheep between two normal sheep. Its legs are short. He's not going to run any faster either. And he probably wouldn't last too long in nature. Excuse me. Pulling on my cable. Now, here's a mutant turtle. He's got 2 heads. Except he's not ninja. Well, this guy's ninja, but he's not really mutant. I think he's an amalgamation. I call him amalgamation. So this is amalgamation. Now, a number of intermediate and high schools have done, I don't know, literally hundreds of thousands of experiments causing mutations on purpose. The poor fruit fly, which has a very quick lifespan, they would radiate them and cause mutations on them. They did this many, many times, all different kinds of schools. Now, if they really believed these things might evolve, wouldn't that be a horribly dangerous experiment? You're going to create some fruit fly that won't ever die or eats people or something? I mean, wouldn't you be kind of concerned about that? So anyway, what they found was curly-winged fruit flies, wide-eyed fruit flies. Many of them never hatched. We had some with yellow bodies, some with stubby legs, stubby wings, and some that were wingless. So maybe that instead of a fruit fly, it should be called a fruit crawl. So if we look at the observations and conclusions from the fruit fly experiments, first the observation. What did we actually see, observe from this experiment? We observed all mutations produced flies that were inferior to the original fly. And these experiments have been done hundreds of thousands of times all over this country and probably all over the world because it's a simple experiment to do. But what did the evolutionists conclude after this experimental data? Fruit flies must have evolved as far as they can go. What? Where did they get that? Well, here's an evolutionist making a statement about mutations. Mutations do not produce any kind of evolution. This is an admission by a famous evolutionist. Here we look at a textbook, and they want us to think critically. Do you think humans are still evolving? Well, that's kind of a loaded question. It's a little bit like saying, are you still beating your wife? Well, the real conclusions of the fruit fly experiment are, first, it limits variations. There's loss of genetic material because of the defects. And most are harmful, if not fatal. Now, we have some genetic diseases, mutations in humans that are problems, things like hemophilia. And there's other diseases where people die of painful, horrible deaths and whatnot from mutations. We don't know of any mutations that make humans better. Can you name one? I should mention, we are exactly halfway through the seminar. Tonight and the whole thing. So, mutations didn't pan out for us. No evolution here. I think we can safely say, myth busted. Now, there was another Dr. Behe, who wrote a book. It was a really interesting book. And in it, he talked about irreducibly complex systems. Excuse me. The idea is that there are a number of systems in your body that without numerous parts working together, they won't function at all to help the species. Let me give you an example. We have a mousetrap. Oh, get him out of there. And on the mousetrap, this is actually a rat trap, we have a hammer, this thing, that hits the creature. We have the spring, which makes it go. We have the trigger mechanism and this bar here that sets to hold it. And we have the platform to hold this thing together. So let me ask you, which of these pieces could you get rid of and have the trap still work? The platform. No, the platform has to hold it all together. You've got to get this part and that part together, and the platform holds them together. Actually, I asked this question a number of times, and I had a good friend of mine respond to me that we don't need the paint. He's right, we don't need the paint. And that's the problem. We have a number of organs in our body that have numerous functional parts, and if all the parts aren't there, then it won't work. So how do you mutate to those different parts? Because evolution is a slow, gradual thing. You get a little bit here, a little bit there. And every piece has to improve your survivability. But if all the parts aren't there, it doesn't help you at all. Right? So his biochemical challenge to evolution says we have these irreducibly complex systems in our bodies, in all the bodies of all creation, that have to be there all at once, simultaneously, which complicates the idea of evolution dramatically. Now, Darwin wrote this statement: "To suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree." That's in his book. And if you look at the human eye, it is amazing. It's less than 1 square inch, and yet has over 137 million light-sensitive cells. Now, I went out to Google to try to find a really, really good camera. So I found this one camera that's 36.3 megapixel camera, and it cost $5,000. It's still not nearly up to the eye, and you have to realize we've got dual eyes that are be able to see three-dimensionally. Don't discount your eyes. They are valuable. So, the theory of evolution. If we have a theory, you'd expect it to predict something. Has the theory of evolution predicted anything of value for the human race? No. What good is it? It should be falsible. And we've proven it false in so many ways through the years, not just me. I just listened to other people, what they wrote. I didn't come up with it. But they've proven it false many times over the years. But this theory doesn't go away. It's like Haeckel's drawings. They just persist. So here's evolution, and we've shown that it's a problem. So what do they believe today? This is clearly not what they believe today. They believe in neo-Darwinism, that's new Darwinism, mutation and natural selection. So something mutates, and natural selection decides whether we keep it. But we've shown that mutations don't work. So what we have is a theory in crisis. We had this book about it by Michael Denton. He describes how they have so much serious problems with the theory that it's amazing it hasn't gone away yet. And they know it. There was actually an interest. Sometimes they grasp at straws. There was one idea that came up because of this problem called punctuated equilibrium. Basically, the idea is you have a mass number of mutations at once to create some leap of evolution. Sort of the alligator has a bird. All right, well, let's just think about that for a second. Besides the fact that mommy might eat the kid, right? We need 2 of them, right? We need a blue one and a pink one, or we're going to have a problem. How is it going to mate? How's it going to know to mate? They look different now. Because if this bird tries to go up to a crocodile, that's not going to work. The concept of a reptile having a first bird is out there. This is really grasping at straws. It just shows how desperate they are to fill in the gaps in the theory. Now I want to look at something else that Darwin's theory has to deal with. And he understood it. He said, if my theory be true, and I wish they would still say the if these days, numberless, that means a whole bunch, numberless intermediate varieties must assuredly have existed. See, what we see today is we see independent species with gaps between the types. the kinds. It's very distinct. There's no rainbow of creatures out there. There's distinct creatures. So he says, well, he actually believed if he looked enough, the rainbow of creatures would exist alive. But he couldn't find those, so he said, well, they must have existed and they died. You see, they were already successes once. Why aren't they still successes? Is his problem. Well, here's a senior pathologist with the British Museum responding to someone's asking him about his book. Okay? And so here's what he says. I fully agree with your comment on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any fossil or living, that rainbow or living, I certainly would have included them. I lay it on the line, there is not one such fossil. Now, I want to get you the whole breadth of what he just said. He didn't say we don't have the missing link for humans. He didn't say that. He says there's a missing link for every species that exists. There isn't even one. Wow, that's devastating to their theory. Here, Stephen Gould, he's like the rock star of evolution. He died fairly recently. And he said this, the absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages has been a persistent and nagging problem for evolution. So they know they have a problem. So let's look at humans as a specific case. Now, I've heard evolutionists state, oh, we didn't descend from monkeys. Monkeys and us both descended from the same creature. You've heard that before? Except when they give you a human evolution, they show a monkey. That's funny. So, monkey, were you the descendant, the ancestor of a human? Okay. Well, I'm going to jump to the end on this one so you have some idea where I'm going. Human ancestry, bottom line. Some fossils are selectively excluded. What they do is, if it doesn't fit the theory, they don't tell anybody. Gee, that's scientific. Some human fossils are arbitrarily downgraded. Let's say, for instance, we took this population and we knocked off all your heads and lined them up by size. We'd have the biggest one over here and the littlest one over here. So we would ignore all the big ones, and we'd take the little one and say, gee, how unevolved. Right? It's an unevolved skull because it's so small. And by the way, small skull has nothing to do with intelligence, nor big skull's intelligence, either way. So they talk down human skeletons, human skulls, and say, gee, they look kind of primitive to me. And they take non-human skeletons and they talk them up. You see, what that does, if you talk down humans, you get like the smallest skull of a human you can find, and you get the largest skull of an ape you can find. Gee, they look kind of close. It makes it arbitrarily look closer together than it really is. It really doesn't mean they're ancestors or there's any relationship between the two. Some of the fossils are out-and-out frauds. They didn't really follow that Ninth Commandment thing too well. No bearing false witness thing. They're evolutionists, I guess. Darwin thought natives were advanced animals. Well, we've had a number of colonial powers gone out and done colonizing, and they treated the indigenous population as subhuman. In Australia, for example, they have done horrors. They would go and shoot and kill numerous creatures so they could get examples of their heads. You see, what they found was the Australian jawbone was larger than most. A sure evidence for evolution. The only problem is Australians use their jawbones from birth for almost everything. And it actually grows your bone. If you did the same things they did, you'd have a bigger jaw too. If you run with your feet a lot, your feet get bigger. If you use your arm a lot, it gets bigger. Even the bone inside your arm gets bigger when you use your arms. It's not rocket science. In the Smithsonian, there's over 33,000 human remains of people that they think are subhuman. They really need to go out and bury these bones. It's just not nice. As a matter of fact, in Germany, they ran across some skulls that they had taken from Namibia, and they had a big ceremony of returning them back so they could go bury them. Because they had killed these Namibians to show, here's some examples of evolution, or lack of it. And because of a theory that isn't even right. In 1904, in the World's Fair, they took this guy here, Ota Benga, and they put him behind iron bars and let people look at him. He was a pygmy. And they said, see evidence of his lack of evolutionary progress. And he wrote a book about it. How evolved of him. I saw this article recently from November of 2012 when the guy wrote, are humans becoming less intelligent? And he talked about how we don't have all the pressures on humans to help keep the species strong and how we're de-evolving. And he talked about the ancestors emerged from Africa and how we're getting dumber. Well, are we getting dumber? Maybe we're not reading enough books and we're tweeting too much, huh? Now, I looked at some interesting information about what causes some of our intelligence problems. And it talked about stunting is not just about height. With malnutrition comes great susceptibility to disease and function, impaired cognitive function, and even lower IQ. Stunted kids are more likely to drop out of school, blah, blah. The main cause is nutrients, vital nutrients, missing during the first 1,000 days of their life. Here's a picture of two groups of Mexican children. One group was malnourished, the normal Mexican diet. The other was intervention caused by vitamins and such was added to this group, and they're taller, smarter, and they'll live longer. Growth, intelligence, even their genetics is improved. They have less disease, longer life expectancy. It's all nutrition. It's not de-evolving. Now, if you start with 8 humans about 4,400 years ago, you can get a population of 7 billion that we have today. But they say that we've been around for 3 million years. Modern humans been around for 3 million years. We should be hip deep in humans by now. Now, they'll show you a chart like this on humans, and they'll say, oh yes, this is the ancestral path of humans and whatnot. But if the truth be known, there's probably a place you could draw a line. I don't know if this is it. You could draw a line, and everything to the right of this line is true humans, And everything to the left of this line is true apes or monkeys or chimpanzees or something. How many have heard of Nebraska Man? All right, a couple of you. Well, Nebraska Man was big in the news a number of years back. In 1922, they had this in the Illustrated London. They built this drawing from one tooth. Okay, so I can kind of get the idea. You might be able to draw a picture of somebody from their tooth, but he could draw his wife too. All right, you see the problem? Anyway, they dug a little further, and they found this is Nebraska Man. Now, evidence from Nebraska Man was used in the Scopes monkey trial. So you see, they had proof of evolution, and they presented it at the Scopes monkey trial, and it was wrong. A few years later, they proved this. Same area they were digging, and they ran across more skeletons. That's not a man, it's a pig. So I guess the artist was a little deceptive. And then there was Piltdown Man. The Piltdown man was, it was concocted about 1913. They took a jaw of an orangutan and they glued it onto the skull of a human. And they treated it with acid, and they went out to the spot and buried it, and then went with some other people and said, "Oh, look, I found it." Right? And for 40 years, we thought we had proof that humans evolved. 250 people wrote their doctoral thesis on these bones. Then somebody got a chance to really look at them and realized, this isn't good. It's glued on there. Right? So it's a fraud. Now, how many of those 250 doctoral theses, how many of their doctorates were taken away? How much is that doctorate worth? Is that a problem? Well, let's look a little bit at Neanderthal man. We hear a lot about Neanderthal man. The first Neanderthal man was found in Java. The guy went down there on a boat. He said, "I'm going to find human's ancestor. That's what I'm going for. I'm going to go find it." And here's what he found. He went to Java, the island of Java, and he found a skull cap and a femur. That's it. Now, what happened was, a little bit later, some other people were digging where he dug, and they said, hold it, we found some true human skeletons right here in the same layer you're digging. And he goes, yeah, I found those too. I didn't want those to take away from the importance of my find. Okay, here's the deal. If you find humans and these guys, whatever they are, in the same layer, can they be ancestors? No, because humans are already there. Actually, it's just a heavy-duty ape. It's got a big skull cap. They don't have enough bones to show that it didn't. There's another case where they found one that was bent over. And they said, oh yeah, he's coming up in evolution. Well, when a medical doctor had a chance to look at it, he said, no, he's got rickets. He's going down. In Peking, way back around the 20s or 30s, they discovered a skull over there. They called it Peking Man. That's before we started saying Beijing. We were still saying Peking. Well, in about the 1940s, around the time of the World War II, they lost it. And right now, all we have is castings from the find. We don't have the actual find, so there's nothing to validate. Two scientists at the time did inspect it, and they said it was an ape. Except, I don't know how many of you were watching the great Millennium New Year celebration? But China had a very interesting celebration. I couldn't find any tapes of it anywhere. But basically, they had the Peking skull this big up on a platform. And they had two athletic male and female Chinese with torches running up the steps to where this skull was. Like they were worshiping ancestors. It's bizarre. And in many ways, this seems like ancestor worship. And Lucy is a very famous find. Here's all the bones they found with Lucy. And here's a document, article from National Geographic, and they show the knee. And basically, their whole discussion here is which way is the knee facing, and all that has to do with is whether you're ground-dwelling or tree-dwelling. So it's really not a big deal. But what they're showing you, they're calling it Lucy's knee. But Lucy didn't have a knee. Her knee was not in the bones found. That's actually the Hadar knee that was found a year earlier and 70 meters lower and a mile away. It really has nothing to do with Lucy at all. And here's what the St. Louis Zoo did to make Lucy. No feet or hand bones were found. But the display in the St. Louis Zoo shows completely human hands and feet. Now, here was a professor from Washington University said, the statue is a complete misrepresentation, and I believe they know it is a misrepresentation. And then here's the zoo officials' response. Zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look for the overall impression it creates, and we think the overall impression this exhibit creates is correct. What impression does it leave? It leaves the impression that evolution is true. They believe in evolution, therefore they believe that the exhibit, which shows evolution to be true, is correct. So it's indoctrination into evolution, and now what's going to happen? Some kid is going to go in there, and he's going to look at that, and he's going to think there's proof for evolution when it doesn't exist. Because the St. Louis Zoo thinks they're better than what science actually has. And actually, Lucy may still be alive in Sumatra, in the jungles of Sumatra. There still may be one around. Now this is interesting. I believe it was Mary Leakey found these footprints in the ashes from a volcano. Now, I want you to notice, well, in this article, they say, it proves that hominids, not humans, were walking upright 3.75 million years ago. So that's longer ago than humans are supposed to be around. So they say they developed their feet quicker. Okay? So that's kind of what this article is saying. But I want you to notice the feet are pointed kind of straight. And on the left, they have men's or grown-ups' feet, and on the left they have children's feet. The children's feet are kind of wobbling back and forth, but the males or the big people's feet are straight. Okay, you see that? Here is the artist's deception of the whole thing, and you'll see that the guy, the one in the back carrying the baby, I guess I don't know if it's mom. Let me zoom in on the feet. They're making them real pigeon-toed, right? Trying to get that monkey gait going. Except the footprints didn't do that. Now, they knew there was 2 adults and 1 child. But they don't show the child walking because they would have had the child crying on hands and knees. I mean, on its 2 feet and 2 hands, would have gone along like a monkey if they're theory was correct. So they had to have Mom carry it. Otherwise, they couldn't make a drawing that made any sense to us. It would look too human. So you could see they build in the deception into their pictures. And that's not what was found at all. And here Mary Leakey is writing about these footprints. The form of the foot was exactly the same as ours. The weight, the bearing pressure patterns in the prints resemble human ones. Footprints so very much like our own. Like, oh, you mean they're human? Right? Is that what she's saying? They're human footprints. And here's another one. Evidence of pre-modern footprints. It looks like ours. They can't accept where they found the footprint that it's human. It's funny. And this is talking about Homo erectus, and never have we found what we call a Homo erectus and found footprints at the same time. Feet bones at the same time. Because it's kind of mutually exclusive, because if they find the feet, they'll find out what it really is. And you could read about these so-called cavemen in a book called Bones of Contention. It's quite detailed. It will open your eyes to the whole business of what kind of bones they found and what they're doing with the bones. So where does Stone Age fit into the Bible? When did we have Stone Age? Well, right after the flood, everything was destroyed and we had to start over. That's as close to Stone Age as we got. It's a little bit like Gilligan's Island, huh? Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about another aspect of the body that the evolutionists commonly talk about. And this particular topic can save your life. Literally. And that is vestigial organs. They have the concept that certain parts of our body are useless holdovers from prior evolutionary stages. So they like to cut them out. First of all, it damages your body, and secondly, they are there for a reason. Here's an example of a textbook, Glencoe Biology, which says that the appendix is a vestigial organ. Because they compare it to a horse and say, see, horses is much more important over there. But you know what? They now know what the appendix is used for. The body's appendix has long been thought of as nothing more than a worthless evolutionary artifact, good for nothing. Maybe it's time to correct the textbooks. Maybe. Said researcher William Parker, an immunologist at Duke University. The appendix is a vital safe house where good bacteria could lie in wait until needed to repopulate a gut after a nasty case of diarrhea. If it wasn't for the appendix, after you got diarrhea, you would die. Don't let them cut it out of you. It used to be some of these surgeries were a matter of course. They would cut out other parts of your body, like, for instance, the tonsils. How many people had their tonsils taken out? How many people had their tonsils taken out when it was healthy? Well, there are a few people I know of. You know, some of these surgeries that they've done have actually killed people. You know, a certain percentage of people die in a surgery because of a theory. That's not even true. If you looked at the textbooks today, I did a survey, or someone did a survey for me, of high school biology textbooks. 7 out of 15 used vestigial organs as a way of proving evolution was true, when it's not true at all. Actually, the coccyx, they say that's vestigial. The problem is, if you don't have your coccyx, you're going to have difficulties to go to the bathroom. There's certain things tied to it that are necessary. Now, there are no vestigial organs, none of them. Even if there were, isn't that backwards from evolution because you're losing something? Isn't it? And why didn't they think that's some new organ coming in that might do something great? Didn't they believe in evolution? Isn't that going to be some great new thing? We know, we get that tonsil in there, maybe it's going to help us sing in 3-part harmony. And we're going to cut it out, Now I want to look a little bit at the progression of evolution. I want to show you that at every stage of what they think evolution happens, there are significant problems that make it really, really hard to believe. Let's start with the first one. The very first step in evolution is rock to life. That's a huge leap. Well, I saw this one article in 2007 in AP that this one science writer said, well, he wanted to talk about 3 major hurdles for creating synthetic life. Of course, evolution has these same problems. This is just the major hurdles. Okay, first one, you have to have a container. That membrane that goes around the cell, it's really important to have one, and it's really important to have lots of properties that are important. Keep bad molecules out, let good ones in, ability to split and divide and multiply. I mean, the membrane is actually a very complex structure. It's not just a plastic bag. Secondly, it needs a synthetic system that controls the functions of the cell. So it can reproduce, so it can change based on the environment. And it needs some sort of metabolism mechanism. Be able to draw raw materials and process them to create energy so the cell can do something. These are all significantly difficult problems. I mean, you're talking about, just think about, if you have to go to Mars. You have to be able to protect the men and women. You have to be able to operate and function so that you can work there. You have to be able to get from the raw materials on the planet to create food. I mean, it's a difficult thing. Well, a cell has to go through that very same thing, and it's a very complex problem. Now, one of the experiments they did on the whole business of creating life came up with the concept that we had to start off with no oxygen, or a reducing atmosphere, and then turn into an atmosphere with oxygen. You see, they did this experiment. It's a very famous Miller-Urey experiment where they had this closed-loop system. And basically what they did is they'd put a shock into it, and they'd have certain chemicals that they started with, and the idea was to create some complex chemicals out of this. Now down at the bottom, you'll notice they have a thing sticking up as a trap. The problem is they couldn't recycle the things through the loop again because it would break apart what they just formed together. So they had to pull out things out of the experiment at certain times to make it work. So basically what they proved is that it's really, really hard to do. Much harder than they ever expected, and they only did a small fraction of what it takes to create life, and they found out it was really not doable. Well, then you got the whole concept of going from one cell to multiple cells. I can see cells cooperating with each other. I can understand that. I'm helping you, buddy. Let's, stay over here so we can be safe. But how do you genetically do that? How do you get it where you divide and keep together and still be one organism? I mean, the idea of going from one cell to multi-cells, that's a problem. It's hard to do. Or how do you create organs to do certain functions? Well, sex is going to be a problem too. The whole point of evolution is you want to keep your DNA going as much as you can. If you're going to divide your DNA in sexual reproduction, only half of your DNA goes forward and half of their DNA goes forward. So immediately off the bat, you lose half of your value. So why did we ever come up with male and female? Because it's really against the whole principle of evolution of pushing forward my way. It's now half your way. All right, I wasn't going there. How do you get vertebrae, scales, feathers? I mean, each of these structures are complex. I've seen a 30-minute presentation just on feathers, how complex they are and how they interlink, and it's just they can zip them open and zip them down, and it's just wonderful what feathers are. And the whole idea that you could go from a scale to a feather, well, first of all, the part of the chromosome that relates to scales and the part that relates to feathers are nowhere near each other, where they'd probably be if they were coming from the same thing. But their function, the whole structure of the DNA, the whole structure of what the item is, the scale and a feather are just so far apart that you could never get scales to turn into feathers. That's really a big one. Let's say you have no legs. How are you going to get legs? Legs are actually fairly complex structures. You know, you got bones, you got ligaments, you got muscles, and you got to have a nervous system that talks to them, and all the blood vessels getting to them the right way. So it's a big deal to add legs. Eyes. They start out. They say, oh yeah, you get one light-sensitive side of the cell or something, and then that gets more sensitive, and then pretty soon it's seeing. I don't know. That's a long stretch. Walking, jumping, gliding, flying. Flying is an amazing thing, and yet in a number of the different areas, kingdoms of this animal creatures, we have flying going on. We have insects that fly. We have birds that fly. We have mammals like a flying squirrel that soar. We have flying fish. We even have seeds that have propellers on them that fly around. I mean, it's amazing ways that using flight. Well, the next session, I'm going to talk about astronomy. I'm going to look at the moon landing, comets, physics problems, and some very new information. So I hope you'll join me there. Now, so I'm going to call this the end, and then last couple times they've asked for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions now. So here we go.
When do we get together again?
The next meeting will be Friday night at 7 o'clock here. So we've got 3 more sessions, Friday night, Saturday at 11, and Saturday at 3, and we're done. She's talking about DNA and switches that help with adaptation, and no, I haven't studied that. Sorry, I can't help. My wife, Pam.
I don't know if everybody got when you were talking about the pygmy.
The pygmy, yes. Right. The book, the pygmy was put in the World's Fair, was put in a cage. And then the pygmy wrote a story about his experiences being in the cage in the World's Fair. That was kind of fun.
He was
Supposed to be inferior species, and he's writing books. Thank you for clarifying that. Anything else? All righty. Let's have a quick closing prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this time we can gather together to learn about your creation and the glories of what you've done. I thank you in Yeshua, in Jesus' name. Amen.